I guess in fair disclosure, right? So that everybody knows.
Right. We are live
All
on
right.
YouTube now, Paul, as well.
All right. Awesome. Welcome everyone to our first virtual ChiNamo, the Chicago Dynamo community. We started this group a few years back as a face-to-face group, and this is the first time we're doing it virtually. And obviously, given the current circumstances surrounding us, we were going to have Konrad, our speaker tonight, in person with us in Chicago, but he's graciously agreed to do this virtual first attempt with us. Hopefully, we won't have any hiccups. But I'm sure he's got a wonderful presentation for us. And then we also are fortunate to be teaming up with Jeffrey Pinheiro of Revit Kid and BIM After Dark fame. And he's more of the expert on streaming than I am. So I decided to ask him to help out tonight just to make sure that I didn't totally make a mess of this. And so, Jeff, want to just jump in and introduce ours to your group as well, if you
Sure,
could?
sure. So thanks, Paul. Yeah, so Paul reached out. Him and I have obviously, if you guys been following the channel, I've been doing BIM After Dark live now since quarantine began, really. So this is episode 15, I believe, or 16. I have to check. And Paul reached out asking some questions about how to actually stream to YouTube. And through those conversations, he mentioned that he was going to have Konrad on for ChiNamo, which is the Chicago Dynamo users group. And we thought it'd be a really cool opportunity to do this sort of crossover event. And so what we're going to be doing is actually I'll be checking on to the YouTube chat, and Paul will be checking on their go-to meeting for the local. And one of the things I did want to mention, which I think will be pretty cool, is user groups, whether it's Revit user groups or Dynamo user groups, are extremely valuable and really cool things to have, right? And so we're in a unique opportunity now where we're kind of set up virtually, so it doesn't necessarily have to be as local anymore, which I guess is kind of cool. But it's one of the things that I've been fortunate enough to sit in on and be part of some of the groups. And so if you are interested in this setup, I think you should look into how to set these kind of groups up, because getting to know each other locally who are into Dynamo or Revit is extremely valuable. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, Konrad. And I think this will be pretty fun. Feel free, this is all live, so feel free to chat away and ask questions in YouTube, and we'll try to interrupt Konrad without interrupting his thoughts too much.
So Konrad is going to share a whole bunch of great stuff with us tonight. I'm going to just turn it right over to him and let him do his own introduction. But some of you have probably used his packages and plugins already for Dynamo, and I think he's going to give us a little bit of history on some of that, and then talks about some of the things he's working on currently. So, Konrad, take it away. We're very excited to have you tonight.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you putting this event together. Like you mentioned, I now live in Chicago, so kind of wanted to get back into the things because I've been gone for 6 years. Um, so I went to school down here, studied architecture at IIT, and after that I kind of went out to New York, and that's where I've been for the last 6 years. So this is kind of a homecoming event for me. Um,
Welcome back.
so Thank you. So really quickly, I wanted to talk about data, and the idea for this presentation is really that I would kind of go on a little bit of a personal journey through time as I was, really right after I left Chicago and went to New York. I started working for Grimshaw, and that's when I kind of got into working with computational design tools, things like Dynamo, Grasshopper, and that's where I was first introduced to the idea of extracting data out of different pieces of software, doing some sort of data analytics, visualization, whatever that is. So this is really a little bit of a journey as I was learning to do these things, the tools that I've been using over the years, things that I've learned to look out for, and most recently, where I'm at currently, what I'm working on. So let's get into it. A little bit about me, really quickly. Personally, I'm a husband to my beautiful wife Milena, and most recently a father of my beautiful daughter, Amelia. She's 6 months old, a little bit over 6 months old. So we kind of escaped the New York epicenter of the COVID-19 right at the end of January. Um, the last minute, unknowingly, a little bit of an accident, and lucky wanted that too. So now we're back in Chicago. I also have a blog called Archilab. I started back in school, where I blog and post. I haven't done a whole lot of kind of personal blog blog posts in a while, but most of the time I just post tutorials and kind of step-by-step instructions over there. So if anyone's interested, go head over to archlab.net. And I also maintain a bunch of different packages that I built up over the years for Dynamo, Grasshopper. So that all kind of falls into the Archlab work that I've been doing. A few years back, we also co-founded and started Bad Monkeys with a couple of my friends that really started from the Dynamo forum, which back in the days was a WordPress page that was just horrible. It sucked. And we started meeting up with a couple of guys that had, I don't know, we just started talking about Dynamo and started meeting up on Facebook. And that turned into Bad Monkeys. We converted that eventually into a bunch of different consultancies. We all operate under the same kind of umbrella of Bad Monkeys. And most recently, a couple of guys from Bad Monkeys and I co-founded Bimbeets, which is a software that we're offering as a product that we're offering recently. And that, running a startup, that's a whole another story. We can probably do a different presentation or that, but it's a fun exercise where I thought that I would just be a programmer, but as a matter of fact, I'm doing a whole lot of other things, including taking sales meetings and posting marketing materials, and it just goes on and on. But that's kind of what I'm at the moment. So really quickly, these are the 4 stages of what I call this development that I've been doing over the years with the data, and I kind of want to tap into each one of these and talk about each one of those in detail. So we're going to talk about Dynamo, and then building a Revit Add-in and kind of using that, and the pros and cons of that. I'm going to try to keep the presentation. I understand this is a ChiNamo, so it's a Dynamo user group meeting, so I'm going to try to focus on Dynamo a little bit more than I would normally do, talking about this stuff. So I'm probably going to skip over some of the other, I don't know, maybe more exciting things, but in the name of keeping to the Dynamo and not kind of venturing too far outside of the reservation here, I'm going to try to keep it focused on that. So really quickly with Dynamo, when I first started, I was really back in Grimshaw. People kind of came up to me and started asking me like, "Hey, can we do some visualizations, pull some metrics out of the Revit models?" So I thought to myself, yeah, I know a little bit of Dynamo. Like, this can't be really too hard, right? It's a visual programming tool. There's a bunch of online resources and whatnot. Like, I can do this, right? So the first thing we started with was visualizing different wall types. So I was a BIM manager. I was in the BIM manager position, kind of managing different projects, and we wanted to know if there's a way maybe to optimize our Revit templates by removing some of the wall types that no one was using. So I figured, right, I didn't know any better at the time, so I figured I would start with Excel. Like, Excel has some basic charting libraries built into it. And, I was building the Bumblebee library. For anyone that knows, that heard of Bumblebee, it's an Excel interoperability plugin, a package for Dynamo, right? So the idea was that, hey, it has an API that I know relatively well because I was building that plugin. And it has charting libraries built into it. So why don't I just try to expose some of the charting capabilities for Bumblebee, right? And just a little bit of a side note for those of you that are not familiar with Bumblebee, Bumblebee is a Dynamo package for reading and writing data to Excel. And really quickly, I know there's a built-in Excel component in Dynamo, but the reason why you would want to try Bumblebee if you're interested in that kind of thing is because it allows you to read the data a little bit differently than the built-in component that grabs basically everything out of it. With Bumblebee, you can be a little bit more specific by supplying in ranges of data. You can also read and write data to multiple sheets at the same time, to multiple ranges, so you can build up a lot more complexity with Bumblebee. You can also do things like conditional formatting, and this one is a simple exercise that I was using this for was whenever I was running a project towards the end of the deadline, for example, when we're submitting, issuing drawings, I would run a drawing list with a bunch of parameters that needed to be filled out for each one, and then conditionally format that. And I could quickly spot things that were not filled out by the team members, just send an Excel spreadsheet to them and be like, hey, fill this thing out. And then I could push that back into Revit. So this was a quick and easy way of doing that with Bumblebee. All right, but if we, going back to what I was actually really trying to do was visualizing wall types. So I ended up building a couple of different different components for visualizing things like pie chart data. And you can probably see this on the screen. There's a ton of different inputs that you kind of had to supply for this. So, you know, not only sheet names and size and ranges and all that, but as you were building out each one of these visualizations, the API in Excel really allows you to customize each one of the little components of this. So you could style the legend very detailed. You can start the chart itself, the graph, and that just kind of, you can see this from this little portion of the graph. It just became really, really big and complicated, right? And not only
Muted. Unmuted.
there you go. So not only did it become really complicated to push that data in there, but I also had to pick out a bunch of APIs and write a bunch of code in Python. So there was a lot of that involved, and I would totally not recommend this to anybody, right? So if any one of you ever use the Excel APIs, don't build charts in Excel automatically with the API that they offer. Not only is the API just a mishmash of things that came from the PowerPoint APIs, for example, or Word APIs, it's just a mess, right? It's pretty well documented, but it's just a mess, and I totally not recommend using that. So I was kind of questioning myself at that point, and was like, all right, so what do I do next, right? So why don't I write some more code? So I went back to the drawing board, and I tried to look for the best visualization library out there. And that turns out to be the library called D3. D3 stands for Data-Driven Documents, and it's a JavaScript library originally written by a guy that works at the New York Times by the name of Mike Bostock. And it's probably hands down the best visualization library out there, but it's also a very low-level visualization library. So instead of building charts by supplying it like, here's a list of points, give me a bar chart. It doesn't work that way. With D3, you're literally drawing the charts on canvas with SVG objects, right? So you're drawing a rectangle here and a rectangle there kind of thing. So I thought to myself, well, this is awesome. Why don't I just wrap this thing into a package in Dynamo so that I can actually have those components where like, oh, here's a bar chart, plug in a list of points, or a list of values, and then you're going to be able to build those, right? So that was really the idea with that. And then, you know, I was like, yeah, this can't be really that hard. I mean, I know a little bit of CSS and HTML, and I'm going to learn some JavaScript. Well, like, why not? Let's do this. So yeah, so for those of you that are interested in seeing that package in action, it's actually called Mandrill nowadays. So I ended up building that, and it's available in the package manager. The cool thing, again, a little sidebar of what you can do. The cool thing with this is I was kind of working with this package more and more. I was looking at workflows where you could build like an end-to-end workflow, do some data extraction in Dynamo, visualize it, so build a dashboard, and then export it to something like a PDF. So then you can link that into an Illustrator, for example. So you have kind of end-to-end like data extraction to PowerPoint presentations or an Illustrator documents. So there's components in there for printing out to PDF, exporting to JSON, exporting to HTML page if you wanted to embed this into like a website or something. And a couple of examples of what I ended up working on with Mandrill and ended up building with Mandrill was when I was at Grimshaw, we were using FlexLM for license management, and oftentimes we would kind of, you know, just run out of licenses, and then emails start flying around the office where like, hey, can you close Revit, blah blah blah. So everyone kind of experienced this probably over the years. So FlexLM outputs a log file that we can read. The only thing with the log files is that, you know, if anyone ever tried to read the log file, it's not the thing that you want to read by, you know, it's not a book that you just open up and read and it's a good read. It's more of one of those things when you want to get your computer involved in parsing through that. On that subject, right, it's a pretty big chunk of data, but I wouldn't necessarily call it big data, because this is where people kind of make this. I want to make a clarification about like when we talk about big data in the AEC. Like, I personally don't think that the AEC works with big data. So a file that's a log file with, you know, hundreds of thousands of lines, even, it's not really considered big data at that point. I think officially there is a consideration for big data when something would be considered big data when it fulfills 3 of the requirements. I think it's volume, so you have to have a really big volume of data that you're leading through. You have to have a variety, so you're looking at something that has a lot of different properties attached to each one of the events. And you have to have velocity, so things like an IoT sensor streaming data, or when you're talking about Facebook doing analytics, like behavior analytics on top of Facebook users, right? So you have a volume, you have a huge amount of variety of data because they unconstrained in things what people can do, and it's also streaming from a billion users at the same time, so you have a velocity. So those 3 things are really what you're talking about when you're doing big data analysis. With what we're doing in the AEC usually is just straight up statistical analysis. That's all there is to it, right? So once we have that distinction, I just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page with that, because people are always asking about like big data and just like regular data. That's really what the difference for me is. I want to make sure that we have that. And so back to this example, right? So a couple of things that we learned from reading that huge log file from FlexLM is one thing that's highlighted over here is this is a weekend. So you can see clear pattern of those little fingers sticking out. That's 5 days of the week, people coming in and checking out licenses throughout the time. And then you got weekends. The thing that you see there is that it constantly hovers around 8, 10 licenses. So people were leaving their computers on, or they were checking out the license for the weekend, right? Probably not a good idea. Another thing that we saw is that every now and then we would hit the threshold. So this is when the emails start flying out, also not a good thing. And this was a Christmas break that we were seeing that people actually checked out a bunch of licenses for Christmas. I don't know if that's like a thing that they wanted to do, work on some Revit projects at home, but maybe this was really just IT not following up with people checking out licenses, going to conference or going out to a site or something, and not giving the computer back, but not checking the license backends, and all of a sudden it was just sitting on the machine for X amount of time, right? After that, we dove into the Revit warnings, and we did some analysis on top of Revit warnings, creating dashboards and kind of trying to categorize warnings by their severity. So this was back in the days when we were still using HTML files, when you can export the HTML from Revit. But it was a cool exercise, and it kind of allowed me to build up all of those different dashboards and visualizations. So just as I was working on this, I was adding on more components to the Mandrill library. So it was a cool exercise for me. Another one was a project that we were working on for Dubai. So I started kind of, as we were getting into this a little bit more, I was getting more and more people coming to me and realizing that, hey, this is the person that you can go to start getting these data visualizations and things. So people in the office started coming to me, and when we were doing this design, they came over and they're like, hey, can you do this energy analysis on these PV panels that we're planning to put on those trees? And the question really was, what would be the difference between the outputs of those trees if you made them operable, right? So like if you could turn the tree to follow the sun in a couple of axes, and what would be the difference? So we did a little study with Honeybee, and this is where kind of Mandrill became like this end-to-end tool, because I could run the analysis in Grasshopper, output the results to a CSV file, use Mandrill to read that, build the charts, output PDFs, link that into Illustrator, and I could just run the analysis and get the results in Illustrator for a presentation really quickly. So they could change their designs, and I could get my presentations out without doing much rework. So, and at the end of the day, the fixed versus multi-axis tracking was a cost issue. It was just a huge amount of cost, and you would never get that money back. And if you were to make an operable one, it was actually better to operate it in the vertical axis than horizontal. Just FYI, if anyone was ever looking into that kind of issue. We also did another study for the actual, not just the little trees, the energy trees as they call them around it, but also the big dish that was sitting in the middle of the site, trying to figure out what's the best way to kind of locate those PV panels on top of that. So similar idea, different kind of designs, and we're just outputting all of those to bar charts and linking those into Illustrator. So in theory, I was thinking like, oh, hey, I can just do this Dynamo thing, right? But in practice, it was really getting a bunch of, and you can substitute the little Dynamo icon for a Grasshopper icon or Revit for Rhino, and you get the same idea. But The reality was that as I was trying to do all these visualizations and data analysis, looking at it in Dynamo, you had to learn a bunch of Python, a bunch of Excel APIs, D3 library, build a bunch of different components for Grasshopper, Dynamo. It wasn't really as easy as I thought it would be. So that's kind of the thing that I learned over here. It was this pretty complicated process. And then I kind of moved into a little bit more programming as I was doing that and started doing Revit add-ins. So with these, I thought this was actually not going to be that bad, right? So there's the Jeremy Tamik's blog. I was like, hell yeah, Jeremy just posts everything that you ever have a question about when it comes to the Revit APIs. I'm just going to go in and work on that, read that blog, and everything is just going to be hunky-dory. An idea for that one was to build up a visualization and kind of do a quick metric and analysis on the model, and then show that to the end user on the startup view. And I want to take a moment here to thank Jordan Billingsley and Hercule, because those are the guys that hired me to do this kind of analytics on top of the Revit models, right? So when they kind of called me up and asked, hey, can we do this thing in Revit? They're already doing some version of their visualizations using Dynamo, and they had the startup view when they were building up this visualization that you see right on the screen right now. Calculating like a percentage, like the score for the model, and this was all kind of hooked in together using a sticky. I don't know if you're familiar with I think it's ID8 sticky. And they really called me up, and I think that when they started running into the issue when ID8 changed the licensing model and you could no longer use the same license, and a bunch of people opened the model and they didn't have enough licenses, and it was like Excel wasn't a good place to dump that data. And then obviously if you're using Dynamo for this kind of thing, then you're running the Dynamo script, so it's always out of date unless the minute when you ran the Dynamo script to dump the data and load it back in, that's the only time when this thing was actually up to date. After that, it just wasn't, right? So the idea was that we replace this with a built-in plugin, populate the data every single time when the document opened, right? And a couple of tips here is like, if you're going to be doing any sort of this work in Revit, use the events, right? So hook yourself into the events and try to do as much of that work in the event handlers, because for the most part, you can do that in a multi-threaded fashion when you're not interrupting or adding extra additional overhead to the Revit. So try to do as much of that in that multi-threaded environment. Revit does have a little few nuances where you can't do that. Literally, it'll just like crash on you if you try to read the document on the background thread. So there's a handful of things that you have to look out for. And then for the heavy operations, I usually always tell people do an on-demand kind of button request for all those. So this is where we replaced the startup view. We replaced it with a dockable panel. Very similar graphics, very similar information shown on that. So the people usually ask like, what's the deal with the Pikachu? This really goes back to Jordan's idea that you should really give people some form of visualization, like a visual feedback that they will relate to really easily, right? So you don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about like, is this good or bad? Like, so red, green, like red, orange, and green is a good way to start, but it's like it doesn't invoke the same kind of emotion. Like Pikachu, you can see is like Pikachu's happy. It's like I'm happy. Pikachu's happy. So it's a little bit easier to get people to react to it. Like that's what really comes down to it. If they saw a really sad Pikachu in their model all the time, the funny thing is like people actually started cleaning up their models. So I was like, holy shit, I didn't know that this was gonna work. But people started cleaning up their models when they saw a sad Pikachu. So now the thing that we're working on is we're actually cranking up the requirements a little bit because everyone's up to like 100% of their models all the time. It's like no issues. It's like, all right, so now let's make this be a little bit more stringent. Another thing is like once you get past that first initial reaction of seeing the angry or sad Pikachu, there's also the table for data. Like people don't usually want to read the data in the tabular format until they kind of want to actually do something about it, right? That's when this data becomes important, right? So we had a little table down below. The most critical part is actually the little Pikachu image, but then you have a table that kind of tells you a little detailed breakdown of what we're looking at. And you can also export a report to an Excel if you wanted to actually pull the actual things that might be wrong in the model. We have IDs for them, and you can go back and clean this stuff up. So quick recap, right? So I thought this was gonna just be a Revit plugin, but as always, things kind of delve into all sorts of different areas. So right now we have a bunch of things that we have to do. I haven't shown that, but we're using Google Charts to show some simple visualizations. There was some Excel APIs, built the UIs with WPF.net. So a bunch of stuff that we have to do that I'm always had ready to go. So there's like when you're building a Revit plugin, there's always more to it than you thought it was going to be. Another thing that I worked on was kind of like an iteration of that, which was a web app. That's back when I was at HOK. So let's skip over this. The idea was that we would build a web app because we wanted to not just have a Revit plugin, but you also want to have something outside of Revit where people that don't usually work in Revit can still have access to it, right? So this was a plugin that I worked on when I was at HOK. So shout out to Greg Schleusner for getting me on that team and giving me the opportunity to work on that. The name of that, probably anyone who's heard my presentation at Build Data Day, was Mission Control. I talked about that over there. The idea with that one was that you had a web app that showed you certain visualizations, but you also had a Revit plugin that showed you the exact same thing in a dockable window. So you basically had a one-to-one correlation in those. And the ones in Revit would open up a bunch of different tools for you. So if you saw something, something was red, like for example, a group, we did analysis on groups, and if we deemed them not to be up to par for that, for the standards, we also had a group manager that allowed you to clean those up really quickly, right? And then the web part side of this also showed you the same report, and it gave somebody who wasn't even in Revit ability to schedule a task. So kind of send your request back into Revit, and that would show up on your the tab over here on the second tab. So then it would you could accumulate tasks as you were working. So we're also doing a little bit of experimental things with that Mission Control plugin by actively monitoring what people are doing in the model and triggering different things, so like stopping them from moving grids or deleting grids by doing the pop-ups. So I believe Guardian is doing that thing nowadays, and it's a pretty successful product all in all. So shout out to them. They're doing a great job over there. We're kind of just playing around with that idea. Didn't really take it that far. A couple of examples of things that we learned while doing that kind of data analysis is that people sometimes hit the sync button and leave the office for the weekends. So we've had sync events that took 62 hours. And the funny story is that, first time I saw a sync event that was 62 hours long, I was thinking to myself that this isn't real. I just deleted it out of the database. I was like, this has to be some mistake. I must have messed this up. The next time it showed up was like, oh, what is this? And then the next one and the next one, I'm like, holy cow, this is something that's real. Like I keep deleting these and they keep coming back. So I looked into it a little bit more. I was like, 62 hours, that sounds odd. That sounds like someone clicked. I looked at the timestamps for it. It's like, oh, this started on Friday at 5:30, ended on Monday at 9. There's something odd about this event. So we realized that people will hit the sync and leave the office because the model usually took like 10 minutes to sync, and they didn't want to wait the additional 10 minutes in the office. It was like, holy cow, like why do people do this? And then anytime you had a pop-up, and it was like 10 minutes later, you're already out the door. And Revit just hung in there and just waited for your input. So people would come back in the office on Monday, hit the OK button, the sync would finish. And I was like, oh my God, this is so bad. You shouldn't be doing this. But that's kind of some of the things that you will learn when you start collecting that kind of data. We're looking at groups. We're looking at groups that have single instances of each group. There are just tons of those in the models, and there's no reason to have those. Groups are usually, in the architectural models, they're usually bad because they kind of slow everything down. For like structural guys, I remember they use those for rebar because rebars don't have a good way of creating sets like that. So it just depends where you're at. So for architectural, we deem those not to be desirable, so to speak. We're looking at dimensions where people were overriding dimensions like 0 to 6 inches just because you can. Revit's such a great tool, so we're kind of trying to spot all of those different things and hopefully prevent RFIs or change orders when someone just, instead of modeling something properly, they would just override the dimensions to fit their design idea. We're looking at families and analyzing families. And I know people are like, site doesn't matter. it doesn't. Like, Aaron Miller is going to argue with you that this doesn't matter, and it's fine. It's perfectly fine with me. I agree with Aaron. We just use this as a proxy to kind of give me an idea of where to look. Like if something's that big and it has 60 parameters built into it, maybe it's a bad family. I should be digging into it a little bit more. So we're looking at size as one of the metrics. And then we're looking at like how many parameters there is, how many of these are conditional parameters, how many of these are voids, how many extrusions is there in that family. So we're just trying to spot like different things that people would do. And on one of the projects, actually, we had a family that was like 1 gigabyte in size because someone loaded a massive JPEG of the site plan from like a Google Earth, I think, picture. And they just left it in there. Like they hid it in the family and they just left it in there. And they loaded that into the model. And it's like, why is this model so big? Like, what's going on? There's nothing in here. Like we couldn't find it until we saw like which family was such a gigantic mess, and we were able to just find it and delete it. A couple of other things that were kind of sidebar when we started doing mission control. We started implementing telemetry inside of our own tools to monitor which plugins are being used, which plugins are not being used a whole lot, so we can kind of focus my efforts because I was the developer on that team building those plugins. So I didn't spend too much time developing things that nobody was using. And quick recap. In theory, I thought this was going to just be a simple Revit plugin, Revit Add, but I ended up learning a whole lot of things about databases, Node.js, Angular, again, more D3. I'm stupid. I thought I could build the visualizations myself. Just because, like, piece of advice for anybody out there is like, don't reinvent the wheel. If someone wrapped these D3 libraries into packages where you can just, like high charts, for example. Like if you can use that library to build the charts, don't try to build it from scratch. It's just not worth your time. I would spend the day building a bar chart just because I wanted to start it from scratch in D3. And I could have done this in like 5 minutes with high charts or like a Google Charts library. So just like try not to reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. So lastly, the thing that I'm working on most recently, which is a little bit of I call it web app plus. So one of the shortcomings that we've had when I was working on mission control is that I kind of made myself be the bottleneck in the whole process. Like I was the guy building all the visualizations, building the web app, and nobody else could really interact with it until I kind of made certain things and visualizations available. Right? So this is not a good way to go about building a platform that people would be able to jump on and interact with it. So the idea with Bimbeets when we started Bimbeets was to kind of open this up to a wider range of users, and not only open it up to a wider range of users, but open it up to more, make it be more agnostic, where you can plug other data sources, not just Revit, but also other applications. So Bimbeets is really a series of plugins. It's not just a single plugin, but it's a series of plugins for all design software. We called it BIM because we started with Revit Dynamo, and AutoCAD now works, but eventually we expanded this into all sorts of other applications like FlexLM or Deltic Vision, so we can pull data from all sorts of different sources. So the idea with that is we picked the first thing that we did, which is kind of totally different than what I did with Mission Control, for example, is that instead of building everything from scratch, instead of building my instead of building my the plugins and everything like web app from scratch, we started with the technology that already allowed us to kind of plug some of those things in and have a base place to start from, right? So with the Elastic Stack, which is the tech that we're using over here for Bimbeets, it already allows you to plug different things like any application that has an API. You can build a plugin for it and pull the data from it. Any database that has an ODBC driver, a JDBC driver that you can connect to it, like Mongo databases, SQL databases, you can pull that data into it. Any file system that, like TXT files, CSV files, Excel file, all of those things that have some sort of textual input, we can parse through that, log files, that kind of stuff. And finally, HTTP points, anything that has a REST API that we can connect to, Twitter, Facebook, GitHub, we can pull data from those endpoints and pull all of that into the Bimbeets database. And also, just like I was saying, don't start from scratch if you don't have to, right? So when I was building Mission Control, I was working on deploying the database from scratch. I was building the REST API from scratch. We're building, after I left, they added user management from scratch and security, so login and that kind of stuff. You don't want to do this. Like, this is probably the worst idea ever unless you want to learn something. Like, if your goal is really to learn something and just figure out how to build these things yourself, then yeah, great, why not? But if you want to just move to something else and do some things that they're more interesting to you, which in my case was just scaling the platform to pull data from all sorts of other different sources, I wasn't interested in building out security management and REST APIs for our platform. So we just built this thing on top of an Elastic Stack, which already comes outfitted with all of those things, right? And then finally, the one thing that I kind of messed up with Mission Control that made me and my co-founders rethink this is that when I was building all of the visualizations using V3, it was really just locked in. I was the only one that could build these visualizations and add them to the system. Like, you needed programming skills, right? So for this one, we just thought, like, all right, let's make sure that when we're picking the right solution, where we can just plug this into any visualization platform. So, Tableau, Power BI, Kibana, whatever you want to visualize that data, you can just hook it into the Elasticsearch database, and you can use that. So people are much more familiar with Power BI, for example. So why don't you use Power BI for visualizing the data that's being streamed from Bimbeets? So that was really the idea for us for using something that's already out of the box, a little bit better than what we would have probably built from scratch, or it would take us a lot longer. A couple of examples of things that you can do. And I'm going to try to keep this on the Dynamo side of things, so I'm going to go through this really quickly. We can pull data from computers. So we have a little bit of information about metrics on the computer. So things on the CPU, like how much CPU is being used by any given process. So like Revit's running really high on the CPU, is using X amount of RAM, is using this much of your hard drive. So you can really quickly see like how computers are performing. So ITs, if they're interested in having that kind of information. You can also connect this to any logging, any log files. So for example, FlexLM outputs log files, so you can get information about the licensing software, who's checking what out, when, which software is being used the most, etc. So it kind of gives you more information about, when you make purchases, you can see the trends, which plugins to purchase and whatnot. I know all of this doesn't make this the easiest thing to do that. Like, you wouldn't be able to mix and match. It's like you buy the AEC collection and you're done. But for those of us that are on the old school subscriptions, when you still have a little bit of control over that, this could be useful. You can plug any SQL database into this as well. So people that have Delta Vision can do analysis on top of their financial data, for example. So you can imagine doing things like measuring productivity on a Revit model. So you can look at all the data streaming from Revit, see how much work is being done at any point in time, and then you can side by side look at your financial data, see how much you're billing for the project, for example. So now you start seeing like trends in when, like on this GIF, when it's playing, the little dash line represents kind of the average of billings on top, and then productivity down at the bottom, like how much work is actually being done. So if your dash line is trending downwards, you're doing okay, you're billing less, and you're working less. But if your dash line is kind of flattening out or going upwards, then you're kind of screwing this thing up. Like, you stop billing the project, but your productivity, like, you're still doing work on it, right? So this one's pretty bad. You can also look at a couple of other things, like software usage. So if you're a design technology department, you want to see if you're investing into deploying Dynamo and Grasshopper scripts. Is anybody using those? Who's using those? Who's using them on what projects? Which are the most popular ones? If you want to run a workshop, you want to know who's using all of these, so you can maybe invite them to host the workshop and maybe spread the knowledge. You want to look at different packages and usage of packages, whether it's for Grasshopper or Dynamo or plugins for Revit. You want to know which ones are actually being used, especially if you're paying for them, or if you're not paying for them, if they're free, like most of the packages for Dynamo. You just want to know if anyone's using them, if you're deploying them company-wide, because they add extra time to the open times events. And then you can also dig deeper into each one of these, filter by specific users, so you can see who's working on what, who's the expert in what package, for example, if you wanted to run a workshop. You can look at things like which one of the components in your scripts are being most deleted. So it kind of gives you an idea about, for example, like maybe that's a troubling component, like people don't know how to use it. Go set up a little document on how to use that, an example or something. You can also cross-reference data between things like Revit and Dynamo, so you can look at which scripts are being ran on what project and what file, who's running them. So if you put this data, for example, side by side with your financials, then you can start making a case for like, hey, here's how much, here's the projects that are using our scripts, our automations. And this is, the eternal question that the DT always gets is like, what are you guys really doing? Is this any useful? Like, do we get any return on the value for this? So you can start putting those things side by side and answering the questions like, here's the projects that are using these automation tools that we give them. How often are they performing better financially? Maybe they're not. Maybe we shouldn't be using Dynamo or Grasshopper for any of this work, right? So here's a couple of things that we've went through, and here's where we at with Bimbeets at the moment, right? So the idea is that we went from, personally, I went from kind of extracting data from just a single source, using a ton of different tools to do that, to using a very narrow amount of tools to extract the data, but we're servicing a lot bigger range of tools. And here's a couple of different ones that we already support. So Rhino Grasshopper, Navisworks, AutoCAD, IFC files, FlexiLand, Deltek, model checker, and log file, basically. And we're currently working on BIM 360, Bluebeam, PDF editing. Adam got excited because he's looking at machine learning that you can start doing on top of this data, because Elastic just implemented the Jupyter Notebook support. So you can stream your Elasticsearch data straight into Jupyter and start doing some machine learning on that. So this thing is just, unlimited potential, so to speak. That's what we're kind of working on at the moment. Any questions?
So I've been checking the chat, and there's been a couple questions throughout, but nothing dramatic. I answered most of them in the chat. They weren't super relevant, but I had a question actually, just because I've also been digging into some data visualization for different things, and one of the questions we always ask is, how are you using the data? And so now that you're working with multiple clients, extracting data from all these sources, how are you seeing people act on these things? Are they changing behaviors? Are they making decisions based on it? You made the example of like the Save Essentials and some of the big families and models and stuff like that. Are you seeing people actually changing their behavior based on this, or is it just us geeks looking at it and saying, "Oh my God, see what's in there"? You know what I mean? And that's that to me, when it comes to the question we always get asked now is great, you made this awesome visual, but what are we doing with it? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So I got a couple of examples.
Sure,
One from back in my days when I was at HOK.
Mm-hmm.
We were actually making a big financial decision based on that data that we were pulling. So I remember Greg telling me that when we started measuring like sync and open times for Revit models across the whole company, and the argument was that we were making an argument to the CFO to give us financials for upgrading everyone to the best box machine available. Right? I mean, like the argument was Revit sucks. It's so slow because it's single threaded. You have to actually buy a specific machine that works best with Revit, right? Like machines that are geared towards working with Revit. And the CFO was like, we're really spending all this money on pretty high end, HP or Dell machines, whatever it was, right? And we're like, no, it doesn't work that way. It's like, here's the difference between, and we start measuring the time that it takes to open and sync on average the models in the box machine versus what it would take on the regular Dell machine, for example, that we had in the office. We extrapolate those differences, and it was, tens of thousands of dollars in just human time that we were saving. And they ended up upgrading everyone who was working on Revit projects to those high-end box machines, right? So that's one example of how you can use that data to make kind of impactful decisions, right? Another thing that we're doing when I was at HOK, we didn't have a data for that we wished we had, and probably something like Bimbeets would have been helpful at that time, but we were talking about cutting costs and kind of getting rid of Adobe, because Adobe just raised their prices. It was like 2 years ago, maybe. Adobe just like jumped up their prices by like another 100% or something. And it was like, we need to get out of this bad country. And there was a new tool coming out called Affinity that, I'm a big fan, so shout out to Serif for building that thing. But, a big company like HOK, you're always kind of worried about, switching everyone and kind of losing a lot of man hours and productivity. So we didn't have a data on like actual use of that. I was using Adobe Photoshop, for example, in full lock, and like, what are they doing with it, right? So, we were just kind of going to them and asking them, like, hey, what do you guys do with this? Like, do you use it? And everyone's using it. Like, if you ask them if they want to try something new, it's like everyone's using it, they need it. Like, they want to stay, they're the ones that have to stay on Photoshop. Like, they want to switch to Affinity Photo. So it's like, we just couldn't convince anyone to try this new thing, and I was like the only one. It was like the Illustrator version of the Affinity.
Yeah.
Affinity design, I think it's literally like one as as easy to use, if not better, as the Adobe version. But it's $50 for a year. It's like not a year. It's a perpetual license. I think it's like $50 perpetually, as opposed to paying like $25 a month forever with Adobe. Right? So this would be like another great use case for some of this data that we didn't have at the time, right? And then more recently, it's like some of the IT data that we can get. We have a client that has been monitoring like crashes for Revit specifically, like log in all of the crashes and automatically sending themselves, because there's a little thing we can do with Bimbeets. We can set up like automatic notifications for different events as they happen in the database. So they set up an event where they would automatically submit a Zendesk ticket to their IT department if Revit crashed, right? And then they were tracking all of those different crashes and then looking at the machines and figure out that they had a driver issue on the graphics card. And they were able to solve that just by tracking which machines were crashing and what was going on with those. I was saying, for example, the rate gauge grid. Anything else?
No, I'm just checking in that. So it looks like Adam's here on YouTube, and he's chiming in a little bit. So he's answering some of the questions for you. But he did say one of the things that you didn't mention was you're getting a lot of traction with alerts being sent to like Teams or Slack when it comes, and that actually is a good answer to sort of what I was thinking too. Is when you see these dashboards, it can be hard. And I think even someone asked about where the Pikachu idea came from, and that's a great point. Is that finding the easiest way to make people act on the data. Sometimes just putting a chart in front of them is like great, right? But then if you get alerts and dialogues and Pikachu angry at you and stuff, I think those are the things that probably make people act, right?
Yeah, and just some of the times like we're setting up those like a bunch of companies are setting up those alerts just to be notified themselves, not so much sending it back to the user, because you could if you wanted to, but we don't always advise just like slamming users with a bunch of different messages. So sometimes it's just like keeping track of the different things that are happening and using that information, that data, to basically tailor your training, for example, for the next session. It's like if someone's constantly hiding things in the view, for example, or unloading the Revit links for all users or something like that, right? Something that we consider to be bad practice. We don't always want to just like, personally slam people. You don't have to do that. Like, you can just literally just track and see what's happening and why it's happening. And then you can invite these people nice and quietly into a training session that you set up and be like, hey, here's what you shouldn't be doing. Right? So you can be a little bit stealthy things with this kind of data as well.
So Konrad, is Bimbeets a for sale product? Is it something that or is it just more that you hire out as consultants to firms that want to use it and you build a custom solution for them?
No, Bimbeets is a full sale product. I didn't want to like hijack this whole presentation and talk about Bimbeets, so I on purpose kept it as short as possible on the back end. Trying to
but
talk
if
as much
people
about
want to learn more, though, if they're interested in the solution that's out there.
So Bimbeets is a for sale product that you can buy. There is no like a little buy button on our website, but just because the deployment process is a little bit more involved. But you can contact us if you're interested. Go to bimbeets.com, and we'll be happy to talk to you about all the things that we can do with it.
Yeah, great. Because I'm sure there's probably some folks on the call who might want to learn more about it. So.
Yeah, so that was bimbeets.com, right?
Yeah.
So I'll post a link in the chat too here, so everyone's got it.
Well, on our side, it's pretty quiet. Haven't seen any text questions come through. So if anybody has a question for Konrad, go ahead and text it in there in the chat window, and we'll share it with him. Yeah, I wonder if it seems like a lot of the solutions are more focused on kind of broad analysis of people's model issues and model health and productivity, those kind of things. But I don't see any reason why some of the same strategies couldn't be deployed to something very specific for a project as well. Like if you were trying to clean up a specific problem in a particular model that had everything to do with that kind of project or its issues, I don't imagine it would really be that much different, the approach you would take, right?
Yeah. So when we were working on mission control, that's why mission control was really set up to identify specific things that we thought were bad practice or bad model content. Like creating multiple groups or overriding dimensions. Like these were specific things. Bimbeets is not so much geared towards that. Bimbeets is more of a real-time tool that runs in the background. There's no buttons, nothing that you have to enable. It just kind of runs in the background and collects the data as you work, right? So it's more of a things that you can do with it that are more geared towards behavior and replying to things as they happen in real time. That's the real benefit of doing things in real time. It's a little bit short, so to speak, on functionality that would just check my model for quality. Like there's no such quality button, so to speak.
It's a moving target anyway, right? Because everybody's definition of quality is a little bit different. But yeah.
We try to do a lot of just to minimize the amount of overhead. A lot of the things that we do with Bimbeets, for example, is geared towards minimizing the amount of time that our actions take. So we don't do a lot of retroactive model scraping for data because that takes longest. We are for example, with families, we wouldn't go into the model and try to scrape the families for data. It would be more as you're loading the families into the model, for example. That's when the family is already open and we can cleanly extract information from it. Same thing with views, for example. We don't just go in and collect information about views from the model. We would scrape it as you're navigating to the view because that event makes it available to us for a quick analysis. So that's kind of and a lot of the things that we do are just kind of quiet and stealth under the hood, so that nobody really knows. If we screw something up, then that's when that you have Bimbeets installed. But hopefully that doesn't happen.
I had a question. It sort of stems off of something somebody asked here. Is the starting view that you showed with the Pikachu and the 40% and using that data, was that something that was run off of with the mission control plugin or a plugin, or if someone wanted to try and actually put that into practice, what tools could they use to? Is it on startup? Is it a plugin? Is it an add-in? What's the best way to go about that?
Yeah, so most of the things that I ever worked on were actually open source, except a couple of things that I've been working on recently. So this was a consulting job that I did for HCM, right? So this set of tools is kind of theirs, and theirs to decide where they want to open source or make it available to the wider public. One thing that I will say, though, is Mission Control eventually got open source right around the time when I was leaving HOK. So Mission Control is open source, and a lot of the things that we did with that HCM plugin, the actual coding stuff, that setting up the dockable windows and collecting data on different events, that was implemented in Mission Control. So if anyone wants to go to HOK's GitHub page and look at that code, all of that stuff is available out there. So we can repurpose Mission Control if you wanted to do very similar things.
Somebody asked about, and I think you talked about it a little bit with the Qatar, was it Qatar or Dubai, the example of the solar umbrella things, and sort of the idea of visualization and computational design. So how do you see that melding together? I know the typical sort of processes, running analysis, doing the grasshopper thing, being able to check, rotate, all that good stuff, or whatever the computational design may be. But as far as data visualization and sort of what you've been showing, have you seen or used or created examples on as far as that is concerned, using data visualization to drive computational design? I guess is kind of what they're asking.
Using data visualization to drive computational design, as in being able to validate that that's like the right way to do things.
I think so. I mean, that's the kind of what I'm thinking when I'm reading it. is sort of if you're using the data to drive design decisions, I guess could be part of it, and that could be considered a little bit of computational design, right? It's sort of the introduction to.
Yeah. So I mean, the typical use case that you have with something like image modeling, for example. People would come to designers within the company would come to us as the design technology group. They would come to us after the design was complete to basically give them we need the lead certification, so we have to show that this is energy efficient. Like, can you run some analysis and fill out this lead form for us? It's like, yeah, okay. Now, if Mustafa was here, he would just basically be like, place bomb and hide under the desk. It's like, so. But with this one, I was actually proud of my crew over there, because they came to us when they were discussing all of those. And like, if you're doing a project in the Middle East, when you're basically building something in the middle of a desert, and this might sound horrible, but like, you dig a hole and oil springs out of it, so you basically don't have a budget. This is one of those projects, right? So you can have conversations about making motorized 20 meter tall, umbrella trees with PV panels on them, right? So they wanted to have these conversations with us about it. And we were open to designing, and the engineering team that we had, they were happy to design motorized and, movable, PV panel trees, or whatever you want to call it. And they were saying it's going to be really, really expensive to do that, right? And so we were asked if this, do this analysis so we can figure out and make an argument to them is like, this is going to be a financially viable decision to make, because it doesn't give you that much big of a return on the actual solar gain side of things. Like it will take you hundreds of years to get that money back from the PV output. It's like it doesn't like the basic static fixed one is just good enough. So it wasn't worth it, especially for we had I think it was 12 or 13 of these PV trees on the side. Like, if you were designing PV farm and you had hundreds of thousands of these, then the combined output would have been a much better financial proposition. But for this one, it just wasn't worth it. So yeah, they did use that data to kind of go back to them and be like, it's not worth it. It's not worth the design.
Yeah, I was gonna bring up some examples that I've run into on the construction side, which I think affect the design, which is just what you're talking about, where we'll utilize data visualization to analyze cost of things, and then also if there's design options, it's really easy to quickly flip through and see how that option affects the percentage of glazing and this and this and this, and how that affects the cost based on the percentage of glazing, and so on and so forth. So it's not, I'm not sure if they're thinking of that as computational design, but to me that is kind of too, right? That data is driving now the design process. So that's a similar. We're not using Bimbeets, we're using Power BI and Assemble and some other things, but it's the same idea, right? It's pulling that data, integrating it, and then taking action on it. Adam mentioned something in the chat. They were just chatting. He was chatting with somebody, Scott, I think he's chatting with, but talking about how Bimbeets recognizes licenses when you were showing the FlexLM stuff and licenses being checked out. And one thing he mentioned was it gets tough with and things like Enscape, where they run as a sub process to Revit. So I think maybe touch on a little bit the idea of plugins and add-ins, and how is there a way to manage those things, the ones that are the sub processes in Revit, as far as if they're licensed and stuff?
So it all really depends, right? It depends how the sub process was built. Because sometimes for some of the tools are when they build as a sub process, and it just really is a sub process tree. It just says it's a Surfshark application, literally, for all of them. So Dynamo player is a Surfshark application, and then Dynamo itself is a Surfshark application. It's just when you click on the task manager in Revit and you look at all of these, and they're just named the exact same thing. There's no way for you to tell the difference between those, right? So what we're actually talking about, Adam and I, maybe for the next release of Bimbeets, we're actually going to implement that. But we're looking at implementing a little service that runs on the user machine that basically checks the currently active window and pulls information from the currently active window. So instead of looking at the process themselves, we're going to be able to extract which window is being opened. So if you open Enscape, it's likely that it actually says Enscape on the window title bar, and we're going to be able to tell that this is Enscape that you got open and you're working in. But you know, if the tools had APIs, then we could tap into. Sure, some of them don't, and that kind of makes us come up with different, interesting workarounds for those. But that's really the idea that we had for sub-processes running in Revit at the moment.
Awesome.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think looks like the chat's slowing down.
So, amazing. Hey, Konrad, do you have a Twitter?
I do have a Twitter.
Why don't you throw it in the chat for me there, because I can tag you in the. I always like to tweet out a picture of the meeting, and I don't see any reason not to do that for a virtual meeting as well. So.
Sure. I always forget arc_laboratory.
Yeah, I have a hard time remembering mine sometimes too. Did I use my initials or my name or?
Awesome. So Arc Laboratory, Bimbeets.com. You said ArchiNet is still kind of going around, or Archilabs, I mean, is that still kind of?
Oh yeah, Archilab is very much still alive.
Is the website archilabs.net still alive?
It's archilab.net.
Yep.
I can throw that in here as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm just posting something in the chat for people, and then I'll add them to the description in YouTube afterwards too. So.
Awesome. Well, I think this was successful. Jeff, we might have to do more crossover events.
Yeah, no, I think it was cool. It seemed like everyone was enjoying the different format, which is pretty neat.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on for sure. This was cool.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for agreeing to join up with us. And Konrad, of course, we've had this one on the schedule for months now, and I'm glad we were finally able to do it. But we definitely, when we do resume live in-person meetings, we'll definitely get you back for a live in-person one.
I would love to. Actually, I don't think I've ever been to the ChiNamo one. I think I remember attending one of those Dynamo user meetings in New York, but I haven't had a chance to be here in Chicago, so I would love to. Yeah,
we've been going for a while now. I mean, we don't meet every month. We meet usually bi-monthly, and then things come up, and so sometimes we miss a month, or like I don't know, worldwide pandemics and all.
Yeah, those don't happen too often.
Pretty good group going, so been pretty pleased with it. So, well, thank you once again. It's been wonderful. Thanks again, Jeff, and we had Frank in the background there. Thanks for helping out too. And
sure. Hey, I wanted to say, if I could, real quick, we're always looking for presenters as well. So everybody tuning in, if anybody wants to present at a ChiNamo, they can contact Paul, go through our meetup page, and let us know, and we can set something up as well.
Thanks, Frank, for remembering to say that. I was going to forget. And I guess now that we're a broader audience, we don't even necessarily have to just be Chicago, right? So we can do remote.
Who knows when the next in-person ChiNamo meeting will be? I mean,
yeah, right.
So we can entertain presenters from all around. So.
Yep.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much,
all right,
everybody.
Well, thanks everyone for attending. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email afterwards, and we'll do our best to get them answered for you. So,
Have a great night, everybody.
Right. Okay.